everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of the conference's Spread Respect Conversation series. My name is Kate Berkshire. I'm the Senior Associate Commissioner at the League here, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you this morning. I know that it's been a busy and long year, and everyone has been looking forward to a little bit of unplugging and relaxation this summer. So just want to start by saying how appreciative we all are for you to spend a June morning with us for this conversation. The investment that you all, if you're a coach, an administrator, staff, a student athlete, that you make in this topic and in our Spread Respect initiative is felt around the league broadly. So thanks for being here and showing up. Today's episode is Pride Month oriented, and we are featuring an administrator, a head coach, and a student athlete who are all going to speak candidly about their experiences as members of the LGBTQ community, and we're going to dig into their unique journeys both personally and professionally. We're lucky enough to be moderated by our very own commissioner, Amy Huchthausen, and she will lead us in today's conversation. We are going to record this conversation so that it can be viewed after the fact and shared widely. So just a heads up on that if you have to step away for any part of it. We are also going to take questions through the episode. So feel free to submit those through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Questions can be submitted anonymously if you wish. And if you want to do that, there's a small box that just says submit anonymously, and you can click on that before you actually send your question in. We will attempt to try to infuse those into the conversation naturally. And if there's time that permits at the end, also take any that we weren't able to cover. And then lastly, I want to just remind you all to take a brief survey at the end of the webinar. A link will populate in the chat here in just a couple minutes, and then also will pop up at the browser once you click leave webinar at the end. That survey should just take 1 or 2 minutes, but it offers our staff valuable insights in terms of how to plan future Spread Respect conversations. And now that we're closing out this academic year and starting to roadmap out future Spread Respect conversations, we'd certainly appreciate your feedback. So thanks in advance for that participation. One quick plug, our content team has done a fantastic job this month rolling out all things related to Pride. We've got the voices of student athletes, coaches, administrators, outside of Casey, Renee, and Colleen today, that are sharing their thoughts on what Pride Month means. So please, by all means, we invite you to join in the conversation by clicking on hashtag Spread Respect or tagging us, hashtag Spread Respect, or tagging America East and anything. We just want you to be a part of the conversation and check out what we're doing in the Spread Respect initiative this month. As always, you can also go to americaeast.com/Spread Respect, which has all of our Spread Respect initiative materials. And then lastly, if you have a question or you want to just share your participation in watching today's webinar, please, we encourage you to use hashtag Spread Respect on Twitter, Instagram, and all the other social medias that are over my head, at least for now. But join the conversation. We love knowing that you're here supporting this initiative. So with that, I will turn it over to, as I mentioned, our very own Commissioner, Amy Huchthausen, to lead us through today's conversation. So over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Kate, and welcome everyone to this panel. It's one that I'm not sure I understand. Really excited about hosting and moderating. And I asked our staff if I could moderate. I usually try not to interfere too much, but I was so interested in this topic and so much wanted to be part of this panel that I'm glad that they let me jump into the moderating queue. Before we get into it, I just want to say, this is something I've been really proud of, the work that our conference has done with respect to LGBTQ plus inclusion going back, 8 years now. And it's been building every year since then, in large part due to the participation engagement from our member institutions. So to have our student athletes, coaches, administrators continue to be so supportive about the efforts in this area, knowing how important and valuable it is to each person on each of our campuses, has really allowed our conference to, I think, be a leader in this space and continue to be a leader in this space. So with that, I'll love to give a brief introduction to our 3 panels today, and then we will dive in. We'll start with Casey McDonald from our newest member at NJIT. Casey began his tenure at NJIT as the Director of Athletics Operations and Facilities in January of 2015. He was a really strong asset in the planning and development of NJIT's $127 million wellness and event center that was completed in the fall of 2017. And for those that haven't had a chance to visit that campus, I can't wait for you to see that magnificent facility that our newest member has. Casey is a native of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and graduated from Aquinas College, where he began his career in coaching as a director of basketball operations for the women's basketball program at the institution for 2 seasons. Casey lives in Newark, New Jersey. So Casey, welcome to the panel. Colleen, Coach Mullen is our next panelist. Colleen's entering her 5th year as head coach at the University of Albany in women's basketball. This past season, she coached her team to the America East playoffs into the semifinals. She arrived at UAlbany after spending the previous 7 years at Army at West Point, where she was promoted to associate head coach during her tenure. She made her way to Army after 2 years at LIU, where she was a top assistant and recruiting coordinator. Colleen is no stranger to the America East. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of New Hampshire in 2003, where she played basketball. She went on to earn her MBA from Southern New Hampshire in 2006. Colleen and her wife, Lauren, have 3 children that I hope that they would have popped into our video today, but I assume that's not going to happen, unfortunately. And then finally, representing the student athletes of the America East is Renee Ward. Renee is going into her senior year at Stony Brook, where she plays women's soccer. She's originally from Trinidad and Tobago and is majoring in geology and minoring in geospatial science. We'll have to have another webinar, Renee, where you tell us what that actually means. She's a part of Stony Brook's mental health group called Pause. She's a member of the Black Student Athlete Huddle at Stony Brook, which has been really active in this last year, along with being a member of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Prior to her time at Stony Brook, she co-captained the under-20 Trinidad women's national team in 2017-18, and she also made appearances for the U17 and senior national team, which is pretty darn impressive to have a talent like that at one of our institutions. A fun fact about Renee is that she is a huge fan of the show Friends and has watched the reunion already multiple times, which is pretty impressive, seeing as just came out a few weeks ago. So Casey, Colleen, Renee, so glad to have you with us today. And honestly, really pleased that we have some gender diversity and racial diversity on this panel. I think it just, again, speaks to the commitment of openness and inclusion that we have in this conference, that we can have, all 4 of us openly gay being part of this panel and being confident in a safe and trusted space. So appreciate your time today. So we're going to dive right in and get a little personal. I'd like to start with Casey and maybe just talk a little bit about sort of one key segment in your journey in coming out that you think would be really helpful for this group to know. Everyone, we hear all the time, right, that everyone has their own coming out story and journey, and that there's no right or wrong way to do it. But I think there are key inflection points for each person that can really be helpful to resonate with other people and show that, it does get better and that you have supporters and allies out there. So we'll start with Casey.
Well, thank you, Amy, for letting me be a part of this. It's awesome. I actually came out as a publicly gay man in October on National Coming Out Day. So I've only been out for about 9 months now. And it was the most overwhelming, exciting, awesome day that I've had in my lifetime, 31 years. It was awesome. It was the amount of support that I received from family, from friends, from alumni, from NJIT. It was awesome. I always kind of knew in the back of my head that, I've always had that thought that, I'm gay, but I never admitted it to myself. And as soon as I did, it was the most thrilling experience. It was such a relief. And I would say that, it's not that I had anyone kind of like push me or to get me to that point, but I did have a confidant, one of my very good friends, who helped me along the way, and someone I could talk to and share my feelings and thoughts with, and that definitely, wouldn't say pushed me, but it made me realize that, why am I hiding myself? Why am I living behind this facade when I don't need to? it's who you are. And, you know, that's me. Like, why would I want to live behind a wall that isn't, you know, true to myself and not being honest? It like I said, I still to this day, it's like, anybody asks me like my story, it's like, I just get all excited about it. It was because it was such a great experience. And for me, I had the greatest experience when I came out. It was awesome.
That's awesome, Casey. October, we were in the middle of the pandemic. Can you give just a couple of comments about how that maybe contributed to the timing of your decision and realization to come out?
I'll say, you know, during COVID, everybody had a lot of alone time. You know, you weren't seeing family, you weren't seeing friends, and I live alone. So I had a lot of time to think, and I think that it helped. I would say, you know, if this pandemic didn't happen, I probably wouldn't be the person I am today. 100%. I can definitely say that. So, I mean, I guess for one thing, thank God for COVID for that, for me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely, it's been difficult. I shouldn't say it's been difficult, but you know, with being, other than, you know, going out and living your life, you know, you can't, I'm a 31-year-old single gay man. So, you know, to be able to go out and meet people has been a little bit difficult, I will say, in the last 9 months with, you know, COVID. Now that things are starting to open up, it's been great. It was, I would say that it probably did push me a little bit to really, you know, think about my future, my life, and, you know, all right, this is who I am. Like, let's live your life, be who you are.
Yep, that's fantastic. Coach Mullen, you have a little bit different journey with your coming out story. Why don't you touch on a couple of key things in that journey that might be helpful to our audience today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy and the Merrick East, for putting this great panel together. Casey, I love your story. It makes me so happy. And I love that you came out on National Coming Out Day. What an awesome story. So my story is a little different because I came out, I guess, 20 years and 7 months before Casey did. So I've been out for about 21 years now, since I was in college. And it was a much different experience for me because it was much more gradual. I came from a town that was, you know, very the same. Everybody was the same. It was not very diverse. And when I went to college, my world really opened up. And those years between 18 to 22, they're such impactful years. And I see that in my players, and it's such a wonderful time, but it's also a scary time. It can be a confusing time. But when I got to college, specifically when I got to Rhode Island, when I got to New Hampshire, because I went to URI for 2 years, then I transferred to New Hampshire, and I did have gay teammates at Rhode Island, but very few. And I didn't have a lot of mentors or coaches that were out at the time. Most of them, we knew they were gay, but they didn't talk about it or talk about their families. And as players, you always kind of wanted to know what your coaches were up to. And then when I got to New Hampshire, I had more gay teammates, but I had a big, you know, friend group of different athletes that identified as LGBTQ plus, or somewhere in the mix there. And I was exposed to things that were different. And I thought, well, maybe this is who I am. I wasn't sure because I had boyfriends before. I had a serious high school boyfriend, didn't we all? And we know how that turned out. But I think that it was great to be around different types of people. And then I could kind of see like, oh, I think I kind of knew this all along, but it really gave me that space to be more who I was and explore my sexuality. And then as I started to realize maybe this was going to be a little bit more than just a thing, I wanted to tell some of my friends and my family. And it was a little more difficult because at the time, I think the only person that was really out was Ellen, and she had the sitcom, and then she gets fired for being gay. So that wasn't going over big in the media. So it wasn't overly socially acceptable. There wasn't a lot of mainstream things happening. So I told some of my friends from high school, and they were like, Colleen, we already know that, like, come on, obviously. And I was like, oh, okay, that was easy. But then I had to tell my parents. And I think really the impetus of telling my parents was because I just got sick of lying. I was lying about who I was around. I was lying about who I was spending time with. And like, it doesn't feel good to not be yourself. And that's why today I sit in front of you and I'm always myself, and my players can tell you that. Like, I don't ever want to go back to trying to be somebody that I'm not. It's exhausting. And then it was a little bit harder for me. Like, my dad was like, oh, thank God you're gay. Men are pigs. He was so happy. My mother, not so much. She was a little bit more struggling. And it was mostly just because, like, you know, she was a nurse and they had these conversations at work about like people's husbands or boyfriends, their kids, and he's so handsome and so-and-so's son's dating this girl and so-and-so's daughter's dating this. And I was like, Mom, just lie to them. Tell them I get this hot boyfriend that's like rich and, you know, he's tall and handsome. I'm like, it's not your story to tell. Just love me, care about me. And then fast forward, it took some time, but it was great. They're awesome. She came around. She realized I was the same baby girl. And then gradually to tell other people was real. It was a little bit more difficult. And it took for me to kindly find a person, somebody that was really important to me to share with the rest of the world. And then as soon as that kind of happens and I found my person, it just kind of made it easier for me. And I haven't looked back since.
That's great. I love that story about your mom and like what you, yeah, that's good stuff. All right, Renee, you are by design, obviously just the youngest person on this panel, and you heard Casey, Colleen in our prep call, you heard about me a little bit, and just how quickly society, at least in this country, has changed with respect to LGBTQ issues and acceptance and things like that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what it's been like coming through now while you're in college, but then also coming from a country that's been a little bit more, I think fair to say, conservative in this area than the United States?
Yeah, of course. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And as you said, yes, it's a lot more conservative, a lot less accepting of the LGBTQ community. So I spent a lot of my teenage years in denial. Like, at some level I knew, but I just kind of shoved it under a rug because I didn't want to deal with it. It was a scary thing to deal with at that age and in that country. So I gained acceptance of myself through a relationship. So that's how that happened. I don't know if it would have ever happened if I never had a relationship with a girl, but here we are. And so I told one of my closest friends, just because I wanted to tell her there was somebody special in my life, not really to tell her that I was queer. So yeah, it was scary. It had to be a secret because I don't want like people talking badly about me or anything. And yeah, so everything was a secret. It's just me, my partner, and my best friend we knew, and that was it. So when I came to Stony Brook, I had that mindset. And there's a funny story. So before I came to Stony Brook, actually, so when you get on a team, you like follow all of your teammates and you kind of like give them a light stalk just to like see how they are and get a vibe. And I was talking one of them and I saw like a pride flag in their bio, and I was like, I have to be a friend of theirs. Like, this is my safe person that I could go to. Like, I know I'm gonna have to go to this person at some point and like, confide in them. So that was kind of comforting for me coming into Stony Brook. And when I got here, I was still kind of like in the mindset that I have to like tell people kind of secretly. So I told one of my roommates and she's like, yeah, I know, like, whatever, like, what's the big deal? I'm like, oh, okay. So like at that point mentally, I was like, okay, I could let my guard down and like be myself. And that's when I actually like truly accepted myself and like truly decided like I could discover who I am, like explore my sexuality here. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you for sharing that. I love the Instagram social media stalking story. Obviously it's been a few years since I've been in college and they didn't have that around, but it would have been a great tool to research your future teammates on all host of issues. But those are like, that's a great example to me of the unstated things or just symbols and things that we can do as, whether you're identify as LGBTQ or not, or you identify as an ally, the different things that you can do to show your support, I think, for people that you don't know, your colleagues, your teammates, your staff. And so that's the key part of that story that I love from whoever that future teammate of yours was. And just that simple thing of a pride flag and what that meant to you and what that communicated to you as an incoming teammate of hers, I think is really fantastic. So I want to stay on that theme a little bit on terms of the allies and what are things that people can do, whether it's in word or action or whatever it might be, to show support. I want to go to Colleen, and we've talked about this even before you were in our league. I think we were on a panel for some forum at some point in time about what allyship looks like. But can you talk about, one of the things that I've observed in coaching, but particularly I think acute in women's basketball, is the sensitivity, the more historic or traditional perceived negatives around being, openly gay in terms of negative recruiting, inability or perceptions that make it more difficult to get a job, particularly as a head coach. Can you spend just a few minutes talking a little bit about what that experience has been like for you coming up through the ranks as an assistant coach, and then what happened during your interview, or to know that UAlbany would be a safe place for you and your family?
Sure, Amy. It is a great question, and there's a lot that I could, obviously go into with that. But I think the number one thing is number one, I am just so fortunate to be the head coach at University of Albany, at a school that is focused on diversity and inclusion, all the way from our president Rodriguez, and our athletic director, Mark Benson. I mean, I think that being part of an institution that is forward thinking, and that whole process started way before I interviewed for the job, because I researched about the institution. I researched about the mission and values of the university. Luckily, it's a state school in New York State, a progressive state. I grew up in, the New England area, and this is an area where it's important to have an understanding about where you're going to work and who you're going to work for, so that your values align. Just in terms of just across the board, not even in terms of how they view my sexual orientation. But just to kind of go back a little bit as an assistant, it was definitely an interesting path for me with different places. One institution that I worked at, the head coach was very concerned about me she knew I was gay, and she was very concerned about me being openly gay as an assistant coach, because she was gay, but she wasn't open. And so as I was going through the interview process, she was like, are you going to be flower patching with Lauren down the hallways? I was like, would I be flower patching with anybody? No, I'm just going to go to work. It's going to be normal. I'm just going to work my butt off, but I am going to be me. And if the players ask me if I'm gay, I'm going to tell them that I am, because that could be, I'm a role model for them. And I want them to be able to feel like they can be themselves. And they need to see me being myself and proud of who I am, so that they feel like they can do that, because it could be life or death for one of my student athletes. So I had that experience. Then I went on to another place, and we all know Army West Point. And at the time when I worked there, don't ask, don't tell was still a thing. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, essentially, if you identified as LGBTQ in the military, you could be it, but you just couldn't really talk about it. And that got repealed. And, my head coach comes in, if anybody knows Dave McGarry, one of the best guys in the business, says, is everybody going to come out and start dating each other? And I'm like, Dave, don't worry about it. If they were gay before, and it's all going to be fine. But the transformation of that, so recent in my career, is just, it's on the forefront. Like, it's still, and there I did experience where parents would speak about, in one instance in front of Dave, said, are your assistant coaches married? Do they have husbands? And Dave was like, that's a completely inappropriate question. And he just shut it down right there. And we stopped recruiting the family. And at that moment, I was like, wow, coach, like, but that was my one experience in that situation of negative recruiting, which, you think, okay, I'm going to lose out on that recruit, but there's 1,000 other recruits to focus in on. And then fast forward, as I started to realize I wanted to be a head coach, and I said I did my due diligence about the institutions, and I was very particular about the types of schools that I wanted to be a head coach at, because I wasn't just thinking about me and my life. I had 3 children to think about, and I wanted to ensure that my family, my wife, and my 3 kids were included. I wanted them to be at the press conference. I wanted them to be at practice. I wanted them to be at the holiday parties. I wanted to feel like I was a part of the institution and the athletic department so that I could really invest myself. Because if I couldn't do that, I couldn't truly be who I was. I couldn't be authentic. Therefore, I couldn't do my job to the best of my ability, and therefore I wouldn't be successful. And right off the bat, luckily, through the process, my athletic director at West Point knew the athletic director at Albany, and they had had conversations, but I had an agent at the time, and my agent, I'd always say, like, how do they feel about, having a gay head coach, or this school is identifies as a Catholic institution, or their religious affiliations. We had those conversations frequently. And I said, no, I'm not interested. If it's unknown, I'm not interested. But, those athletic directors knew each other, and, Boo Corrigan said the most amazing things about Mark Benson, about how he is so open and, and is a great leader. And the minute I met him, the language that he used on my interview, I knew that I was going to have an unbelievably welcoming experience. He used words like you and your partner. He used words like inclusion, or, oh, we can't wait for your family to all be here on, the press conference. When he announced me with my kids and my wife at my press conference, I was like, wow, I really picked the right school. The president asking me about my wife. And all of that has been reinforced every single day that I've been the head coach here. I've never once felt from anyone anything negatively for my family, but I also feel like I do my part of being vulnerable and putting myself out there to my players, to the administrators, and I try to be myself, and I just try to do the best that I can. And I feel like that makes people more comfortable to have those conversations with me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Colleen. I think I hope the coaches on the call, we could dive into this a little bit more later too, with respect to that, but I'm hopeful that, like, we're at a different time and place here as we sit in 2021, where there is less pressure and fear in terms of pursuing jobs. But I think what Colleen said about doing your research for a whole host of reasons, as she said, not just on issues around inclusion with respect to sexual orientation, but anything else that's important to you. I think there are opportunities now to do that research, and college athletics is big world, but it's also very small. And so using the network and friends and colleagues to ask questions, to really know what you're getting into before you go down that path, I think is really important. That the story that Colleen described in terms of her research into UAlbany, I think is really, proof positive that it can work, and you can work for leaders who are inclusive and respect you and welcome you, and where it's just not a thing. It's just not a thing. Like, that's the whole issue, right? We're trying to just make this less of, where they value you for who you are and recognize it. Like, not that the whole don't ask, don't tell, which is a different subject altogether. But where you're valued for the diversity and riches that you bring to that campus. Casey, since you are more recent in terms of your coming out, can you maybe talk a little bit about what that next day looked like when you were able to, next day figuratively, because we were all still in lockdown, but what it looked like when you got to campus, saw your colleagues, and then what surprises have come about since you've come out as being part of the broader athletics community at NJIT?
So I grew up in Michigan, so I went home and I told I wanted to tell my family face to face. So then I got back to campus a couple days later, and I don't even think I couldn't even walk into work. So people were stopping me left and right, coaches, players. And I think I finally realized it was like almost like a sigh of relief. I happened to be walking through the arena during a men's basketball practice, and which most coaches don't really allow that to happen, or don't like that to happen. And Coach Kennedy, our head men's basketball coach, stopped practice, looked at Coach Rafferty and said, "Take over for a second." Walked straight up to me, gave me a big old hug, and said, "I'm here for you. I support you. Whatever you need, you let me know." And I think at that moment it was like, all right, this is good. Like, this is going to be normal now. And it is. I go to work and it is normal. Like, I am who I am, And I think not only that, but just even the acceptance from other student athletes. I was on numerous occasions. I've had a couple kids who have reached out to me. I've had on Pride Month, June 1st, my phone was blowing up from student athletes saying, "Hey, happy Pride Month. Excited to celebrate this month with you." It's all, and which was great. That was awesome. Unexpected for sure. But I think it's there's still, as we know, there's still a long way to go in college athletics for as a male, as a homophobic, as a homosexual male in college athletics. It's I think it's rare. Actually, I don't know of any other administrators or coaches that are from a personal standpoint. Masculinity is heightened in sports, and I think if an athlete speaks out against LGBT bias, then they might be perceived as gay, and they don't want that, and that's it's tough. I can understand that, but as we do know, on most campuses, athletes have a lot of power. And I think if we can start with change with the athletes, it may change the culture on campus and change the culture in college athletics for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I want to put a pin in the masculinity issue and come back to it. But I don't want to lose this thought. We heard Colleen talk about her research and preparation before she landed at UAlbany, right? In terms of looking at her future destinations. You already at NJIT when you came out. Did you go through a similar evaluation, or was that part of your decision making in terms of, okay, I'm ready to come out, but oh man, I need to think about my workplace and my employer? And did that factor in, or did you already just assume that it was going to be a safe space for you?
I assumed it was going to be a safe space. It never came to mind that it wouldn't be. And yeah, it never came to mind. I mean, Lenny Kaplan, our Vice President, Director of Athletics, has been an awesome support. He's been great. He the same thing, came right into my office when I got back and gave me a big old hug and said, whatever you need, we're here, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone else in the department as well has been awesome. Like I said, I have a good confidant. One of our women's basketball assistant coaches is one of my very, very good friends, and her and I go back and forth on things all the time. And it's great to have that ally, not only as a friend but also in the workplace too. She's been great.
So it's fair to say that NJIT, like similar to what Colleen described about UAlbany, just the culture was already there. So yeah. It didn't even register as another piece to your sort of calculus in coming out.
Correct. Yeah, the culture's there, and we have groups on campus. Our Spectrum Club is our LGBTQ club on campus, and they have prior to COVID, we had I had never gone. Always thought about it, but they had a administrators, staff, and faculty LGBTQ like happy hour once a month on a Friday. I never had joined, but I'm excited to get that started back up in the fall. So yeah, awesome. The culture is there for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
10 times easier.
That's great to hear. Is one of the things that we looked at, just in the whole spectrum of looking at NJIT and what they bring to the league, in our view was their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you never really know until you're there, right? And you hear the personal stories from people on the ground. So it's great to see that you just sort of validate that sentiment. Renee, so we've heard like from the administrator's perspective, right? And all those things, you haven't been at Stony Brook for as long as some of these folks have been on their campus, and just coming at it from a different perspective. As a student athlete today at your campus, what are things that are working well, perhaps in the athletics department or the broader campus, to show you that there is a culture of acceptance? Or what are some things that you think solely from a student athlete perspective, where there could be, you might identify gaps, whether it's at Stony Brook or in talking to your peers at other schools?
Yeah, so just like at NJIT, we have our LGBTQ group on campus. Personally, never been, but I know it's a resource that is there, and people can use it if they want to. I know like right now we're working on an LGBT group within athletics, which I'm really excited about, so that we can just connect, relate, learn, and share amongst each other. Yeah, I think something that we could do like when we're recruiting, like when you're bringing a student athlete in, just tell them, we don't stand for any discrimination, whether it be racial, sexual orientation, gender. And that way, like incoming athletes, they'll know like, okay, well, if there's a problem, I know I could go to this person because they told me, hey, we don't stand for that. So that I could go to this person and the problem can be resolved. So I think that's something that could be implemented, I guess. But yeah, Stony Brook, they also always talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I knew that it would be a safe space, but I think the only challenge for me was just like where I came from, just my mindset from there. It was like kind of embedded in my brain, just to be like kind of secretive and whatever. But I know that Stony Brook is really good about inclusion and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing. It's at least for those of us that grew up in this country, particularly in this part of this country, which is, as Colleen said, I think a little bit more progressive than other corners of this country when it comes to a lot of issues, but particularly this issue or this topic. But being prepared for, making sure our coaches and staff are prepared for student athletes that come from different backgrounds and different stories, that their mindset, whether they come from Trinidad and Tobago or they come right from the state of New York, but happen to just come from a really conservative family or community, to still be prepared and not just assume that because we live in the Northeast, because we live in this state or that state and play sports, that it's just going to be openly accepted and sort of tolerated, if you will. And so I think that's the more we can continue to do, I think, for our student athletes, obviously is why we're trying to do this panel. It serves a lot of stakeholders, but at the end of the day, we're here to support our student athletes. And I think hopefully the coaches, that are participating in this are getting some nuggets in terms of how they can be more thoughtful when it comes to recruiting, and then just the day-to-day oversight and relationships that they have with their teams. Casey, I'm gonna go back to the question, the really important question and point really that you raised around gay men and LGBTQ issues here in college athletics. Like you, I know of a couple, and after this call, I certainly would love to connect you with a couple that have been a little bit more prominent, but it really is, like, off the top of my head, only one or two people that I can recall being openly gay, working in college athletics. And yet, if you look at the ledger, there's a lot more people who identify as women that fit into this bucket, or that identify maybe as non-binary that fit into this bucket. Can you maybe talk, so many things to unpack there, but like, was that something that you think contributed to your longer timeline in coming out? That's one question. Are you getting more like comments and questions from student athletes because you're a male and one of the very few males in the industry that are openly gay? And how can we all be helpful, those of us that identify as female or non-binary, but just the broader ally community, to be helpful, to be more inclusive, specifically towards people who identify as male coming up through this journey?
All right. I wouldn't say it hindered me from coming out, working in college athletics. It never was. It was around. I had numerous friends in college who, were college athletes that identified as lesbian. My first boss identified as lesbian. And I don't think it ever hindered it. And I never even, to be honest, I never even thought like, okay, do I really want to go forward with this? I work at college athletics where it's really not seen. It's rare to have a gay man either as an administrator or a coach or, anywhere in college athletics. So it never really hindered that. Does it make me nervous to think of, moving on and going to another university? A little bit, I mean, but I mean, it'd be great to have the same experience that Coach Mullen had. That would be awesome to,
We'd hang out, Tuesday. We'd hang out.
There you go. And, I think it's different. So growing up in Michigan, it's not as progressive as it is out here on the East Coast. So like it wasn't wasn't like, oh, gay people, like you can't come out. You know, I grew up Catholic. It was never, my parents had numerous friends who were LGBTQ. And it was, like I said, it was more of a personal, like admitting it to myself, because I knew growing up around, you know, friends and family who were, it never occurred to me that it was bad. It just was something I needed to, you know, come to terms with on my own. And I even had that conversation with, you know, with a friend, you know, like, how come you never asked me? You never said anything to me about it. Like, how, you know, and their answer right back to me was, well, it's your journey. It's your story. You like, it's not for me to ask you. It's you have to come to that on your own. And then the support will be there 100%. And I don't remember your other question that you asked me. So
I was curious. I remember in our prep call, and you sort of alluded it today, being a little bit surprised by maybe less the staff outreach to you, but the student athlete outreach to you, even though you work on a campus. And do you think, you know, you are now a role model, whether you thought about that or not, whether you like that or not, you are, because you are one of the few men in this industry who have come out. And so how does that fit into, you know, as you look forward in your career? But then the second part is like, how can all of us be more supportive, especially to our male, like, student athletes that are walking this journey and facing the pressures, like you had mentioned earlier, and the hyper masculinity of sports in general? Because I do think it appears that they face a tougher journey than our female student athletes.
yeah, I'll say it came as a surprise, to be honest, about, you know, the few that have reached out and, you know, confided, asked questions, etc. I was like almost like shocked. Like I didn't expect that to happen at all. It's almost like heartwarming that somebody would come to me, because I'm like 9 months. I've only been out for 9 months, when there's, you know, there's definitely others that have been out for longer. And so I never expected that side, which was kind of awesome. In regards to, you know, helping progress along the way, I think, you know, like Renee said, they're starting a LGBTQ group for college, for athletics, specifically for their department. I think that's awesome. That's something that, you know, I think I'm going to bring to the table for sure. I think we could definitely use that for our department for sure. But I'm not, you know, I don't know what would, you know, other than knowing that it's okay. Like, who you are is who you are. As my shirt says, we're all human. You know, we all have the same blood running through us. So I think, you know, that's definitely just knowing that it's okay, and that people are here for you, coaches, administrators, other staff, you know, athletic trainers, etc. You know, I think then knowing that that you know, you are who you are,
Yeah.
and it's accepted.
Yeah. Colleen, as someone who's been, I'd say, you know, just very much you are who you are. And I love it. That's one of the things I really admire about you. As you've, you know, matured and developed into now head coach, and having, you know, more responsibility as a role model, not just for your team, but in the department, the campus community, and then the broader community. Like, what are some things that you've learned along that journey, into being a leader and a role model that, you know, those of us listening today could take away and maybe implement in our own lives as we try to be supportive, whether we identify as gay or our allies?
Sure, Amy. I mean, I think it has been a journey, and it's been, you know, interesting to kind of go through this path of, you know, being an assistant coach to being a head coach to being a leader, and all of a sudden I'm this, you know, role model. I was getting text messages from people about this article that they put out in our local paper about this panel, and saying that I'm a role model or I'm inspiring. And it's just like, to me, that's awesome and exciting, but I don't feel that way, because I truly feel like I'm just trying to do the best that I can and being myself. I want to give a shout out to all my players that are on the panel right now. And I already got a shout out from Key. So of course, thank you for saying hi. But I really want to thank them for their support, because I feel so fortunate to be able to coach you all, and for all the players that I've coached, going back to, you know, I just had a birthday too, and I was getting text messages from former players that identify all different types of ways. I have a former student athlete that's now is transgender, and he has an unbelievable story. And to get a message from him yesterday was really moving. But I think for me, the biggest advice that I have is that, number one, I try to be vulnerable with my players. And there's way more good stories about being authentic and genuine, so that you can be your best self, you can be the best coach you can be, than there are for not. And for an example, there's been multiple occasions where a recruit or a recruit's parents has emailed me or called me and saying, the fact that you're married and you have children and you're open about this has impacted my daughter, or my daughter's coming out right now, or I would never have come to this institution and feel safe if you didn't show how normal it was and you showed my family how accepting this program is. That's happened as a head coach, and it's happened as an assistant coach at various institutions. So those stories are what, make you feel like, wow, I'm really impacting people in that way. And that's why I coach. I want to be a mentor. I want to help develop young kids. And I want to have them see, a diverse people, diverse women role models for them to look up to, so they can see themselves in different people. That's why I have a diverse staff. When you get to college, I want to be part of an institution that has diversity, because that's the real world, and we're all stronger from the differences that we have, and we should celebrate the differences. And so to come to an institution that has diversity, but sometimes and I know you touched on it, Amy, that you go to a college for the first time and you're around different people, and it's a different experience, and you may have lived in a much more smaller minded world before you reach college, and then you're surrounded around other people. And I think some tangible pieces of advice are to have courageous communication with your players, with your administrators, to be open and to be vulnerable. And I think to give them the platform to talk and to try to be themselves. If they see me being myself, if they see me being vulnerable, then they're more willing to do that. And I would hope if you ask them, they felt that way. Some things that we did this year that COVID kind of let its hand into, was doing, a lot of the Zoom calls and having conversations, open conversations about social justice issues. And like Casey mentioned, it's a human rights issue. It's about people understanding, and trying to understand and asking questions and being empathetic to people's differences. We don't all have to have had those same experiences to be empathetic, to try to learn and understand. And that's going to help us in the future. That's going to help us communicate and relate to diverse people as we enter, becoming professionals. And it's an important growth opportunity. But we facilitated those conversations, and they saw me share personal stories. They've heard me be vulnerable. So then in turn, they can be more vulnerable for themselves. They feel it's a safe space. The words that I use, I don't say, your boyfriend or you're this. If I say boyfriend, I say your girlfriend or your whatever, your significant other. It's the language that we use, the inclusive language that is so powerful. Language is power. But I think just really, if you do identify as LGBTQ and you're a coach, or you don't, it doesn't matter. It's all about being vulnerable and being your authentic self, and allowing your players to be who they are and celebrating their differences, and not standing for anything else. Just like you wouldn't stand for somebody saying something negative, no matter what it was, racial, I don't like this person's shorts or whatever. There's no room for hatred in a program that kills a culture. And I want to have an accepting family atmosphere that I can help develop my players holistically, so that they can go on to a life of success and happiness.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. So many good nuggets in there. I'm going to flip the script a little bit. You gave some good advice for coaches and staff to show, the different things that they can do to create an inclusive environment for their student athletes. I'm going to start with Renee, but then I'd love any comments from Casey and Colleen as well. A question from Michaela, one of our staff members from NJIT. What can student athletes do to help their coaches and administrators feel more safe and included, right? Because if you think about generationally, I'm gonna obviously generalize a little bit, but I think this college age generation right now is more open. They've grown up well past the days of, Ellen being the only publicly identified gay woman, like Colleen mentioned earlier. We now have lots of things in popular culture on TV and movies. And so I think there's I think our younger generation is more informed and accepting than our older generation, people like me who came up in just a different time. So what are some things, Renee, that you think student athletes can do, whether they're, however they identify, but just to be there for their coaches and their administrators? Because I do think that's really important in getting coaches and staff to feel more comfortable in their environment.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. I haven't thought about it like that yet, so thank you for that. But I think Coach Mullen like hit the nail right on the head with the language. I think that's so important. And I mean, it depends on the coach, like what kind of person they are. But like we ask some of their coaches like about their family life and whatnot. Just ask about their life, as you would even if it were a heterosexual relationship. Just in conversation, bring it up, but always use the correct language. I think that's important. Also standing up against anybody who says something that's not right, just defending them, just being a good ally in general. I think yes, it applies for student athletes helping coaches and admins, but I think it just in general, just always be a good ally, like just consciously always try to be a good person and a good ally, whether it be for the LGBTQ community or racially or just their gender, just anything, just always try to be a good ally and stand up for what's right.
Casey, Colleen, anything to add that you observed from student athletes that, are just like cues or symbols that make it a little bit more safe or a little more comfortable, I guess, for you as sort of the quote unquote adults in the room, that we're getting that positive feedback from our student athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when the players ask me about my kids, ask about Lauren, or say how sorry they feel that she's married to me, or whatever they may say. That's, they have something funny to say. But they always make me feel comfortable. They're, they're sending happy birthday messages from my twins that just, my twin just turned 4. They babysit my kids. They're always text messaging and asking about them, or when can we see them, or and it just makes me feel really special. It makes me feel like, wow, they really love my family, and they feel like it's a family atmosphere, and they feel invested in the program, and they feel taken care of as part of our family.
Yeah, Casey, we're running out of time a little bit, but there's a question in the chat from an assistant men's basketball coach in the league. And because we talked about this relative to you being a male, and then the day after when you went into men's basketball practice, and the head coach walked over to you, as you think about men's sports and men's coaches and men's student athletes, like what are some things that we can do within our male teams to, as coaches or administrators, to send signals and just information to our student athletes that it's okay to accept this, to talk about this, even if no one on this team is, the importance of showing our support for the broader LGBTQ community?
Yeah, I think just having that conversation alone, I think will open it up. And I think from my standpoint, Renee hit it, and so did Coach Mullen. Language is definitely something that, words are strong. There's definitely words out there that are still used that shouldn't be used. And I think they're said, you do hear them every once in a while, walking through hallways, locker rooms, etc. And I think it's just kind of, standing up and being like, hey, that's not right. It's not something we say. It's not something you should say. So I think just bringing it up, and if you do hear it, a simple like, yo, that's not cool, bro. Like simple like that is something, that definitely, I think it can change the culture, one word at a time, I guess would be the,
Yeah, no, that's, I agree. The language thing, I think Colleen, you said it, language is power. It's so powerful, because that sticks with you in your head when you hear something. You can't ever unhear it. And the sooner we can just be, more willing to learn and educate ourselves about terms and how damaging they can be. It's not just a word. It is like, it can be a knife to the heart of some people if it's used. And if it's used at all. A lot of those words should be retired from our our dictionary, but then just using the wrong term too, the ramifications of that, you know, even you might just write it off as an oversight, but man, that has a lasting impact on some people if phrased incorrectly. So I think that's really important. I want to have two.
Amy, can I just add something really quick?
Absolutely.
To Josh. I think too, like in men's basketball, number one, I think the Spread Respect initiative that the America East did made men's basketball probably feel like a little, like they were able to talk about, you know, LGBTQ a little bit more. And it's not really a conversation that a lot of men typically are comfortable with, or men's basketball coaches, or some of them are. I don't want to make a broad assumption, but it does start the conversation. But I think what I've seen is there's just a perceived heterosexuality in men's basketball. Or not in men's basketball, in men's sports more, for what, in case you can correct me, it's just more like, oh, you know, this guy's got to go out and he's probably looking for chicks, or he's got to go get his girlfriend, or the locker room talk. It's just that perceived heterosexuality that puts people more in the closet. So it's not necessarily they're always saying derogatory comments. It's just always about the talking of, oh, you know, I'm going to go out tonight and find a woman, or whatever that conversation might be, or your head coach saying, yeah, you know, if you're out with your girlfriend tonight, you know, just saying that, that's perceived that, you know, you're straight. And I think using words as a coach that are like, you know, if you're going to go out with your significant other, or you're going to go with your, you know, your partner, or if you say words like that, then you know you're using inclusive language.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's really important, because one, it creates the safe environment in the present. But as you said, Colleen, you got into this profession because you're teachers and you're educators. And so you're teaching your teams about how to talk about this and think about this as they go out into the world after they graduate and things like that. So we have 3 minutes left. So I'm gonna give you each 1 minute exactly. You know, there's a question in the chat, and you don't have to answer it necessarily directly, but in terms of giving advice to people that still may be struggling with their own coming out process, or just exploration process, whether they're a student athlete or a coach or administrator, what is something, some piece of advice, that you can give to them that leaves anyone sitting on this call with the empowerment to know that it does get better eventually, and it will, but that everyone is on their own path. And so, you know, sort of not to rush it is sort of my advice, is just you come into it when you come into it. But we'll start with Renee. What's one piece of advice that you would have for a student athlete that may still be working through this process?
I would say find someone that you can confide in, and just get it all out. You'll feel a lot better. But it's all on your timing to like actually come out. And something that I believe in is you don't have to come out if you don't want to. I think that I really don't like the expectation that your relationship, if you have a relationship with somebody, it's going to be heterosexual. Like I really don't like that. Like I want to get to a point in society like where you don't there's no expectation for the gender that you're going to be with. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it did. But yeah, so just do it on your own time and find somebody to confide in, because getting it all out will make you feel a lot better. And if you don't want to come out, you don't have to. Just be with whoever you want to be with, be who you want to be. But yeah.
Yeah,
that's what
I think that's so important. The coming out doesn't have to be a big party. That I think sometimes that phrase implies like there's this big like reveal all of a sudden. That's not the journey for everyone. That's for sure. Colleen, how about you?
Yeah, I think, you know, if anybody is knows somebody or feels that way, to call me, or to call somebody that they know that might identify as LGBTQ, and have conversations, talk to, you know, professional help, talk to a counselor, talk to somebody that you can trust, because it feels so good. And it can be hard just getting that out there and accepting it, but it's on your own time. It's how you feel. But if anybody is struggling, please, my phone number and my email is on the website. Call me anytime.
Casey, we'll have you bring it home as our like newest member to the open community.
Well, you know, like Colleen and Renee both said, it's your time, it's your story. So when you want to, you can. Renee said, if you don't want to and you just want to live your life, that's the way you can live too. I mean, it took me 15 years, and when I finally did, not that I, regret not doing it earlier, but I don't think I'd be who I am today if I did. My journey, my story, that was awesome, and I think when you get to that point and you can finally get there, I think you'll have a sense of relief, just like I did. And having, that confidant was like I was meant to be here for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I want to thank everyone so much. We, like I said at the beginning, we've been doing some work in this space for over 8 years. And while society has, I think, changed for the better, laws have changed for the better in terms of equality. We see in this month of June and Pride Month, we see a lot more rainbows with company logos and things like that all over our communities and on social media. And that's fantastic. It's a symbol, I think, of progress, but it doesn't dismiss the real issues that people face in their individual journeys. And so, from my perspective, this work is never going to be done, because I think we still have a long ways to go, even though we've certainly made strides, our society has made strides. Each individual person has their own story and still can be really difficult and painful. And so to the extent that all of us can continue to be great allies so that the journeys are positive, like Casey and Colleen talked about, I think the better we are as administrators and leaders and coaches and student athletes in college athletics, but particularly in this conference. And I want to thank Casey, Colleen, and Renee so much for your willingness to be part of this panel, to share your journey, to be vulnerable, to be courageous, all these great words that have been mentioned by our panelists today. I think it's so powerful for our community here in the America East Conference. And I just want to say thank you to everyone, really, truly.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks,
Thanks, Amy, and thanks to the entire panel. With that, not much else to say. Amy summed that up perfectly. Just want to put a plug out though, based on this conversation. Obviously, we're focused in on Pride Month, but this is work that takes the entire year. And so reach out to us at the League office and let us know if you want to be involved in Pride Month initiatives and campaigns, but also for everything that we're working on through the Spread Respect initiative for the course of the year. We are always willing to have a conversation and would love to invite you into the fold. So thanks so much. Take the survey that's going to pop up when you leave the webinar here. And just thanks to everybody, and take care of yourselves this summer. Thanks so much for being here.